In this video, we are going to be looking at HTML and CSS put together, how we can make our web page look different or visually appealing using CSS. So, what do we understand by CSS? As it is an acronym, it stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it saves a lot of work because it helps us control the layout of multiple web pages at a time, all at once. So as I said earlier, with CSS you can control the color, the size of the text, the spacing between elements, how elements are positioned and laid out, the background images or background color are to be used, different display for different device and screen sizes, and much more. So CSS is used in controlling the layout of our web, of our item that we have written in HTML. So we can use CSS in different ways. We can use it inline, that is having it as an attribute in our HTML element, or we can have it as internal style when we have our style element in the head element, that's under the head section as a child element. Then we can have it written in other file, maybe such as a file that has an extension of .css. That's an external file. Then it will be linked into our web page using the link element in our HTML head element. So the most common way to add CSS is to keep the style in external CSS file, because when we're actually working with large projects, it won't be a nice thing to actually write the same style all across different web page on different program. So we can use a particular CSS file to reference the style that is very alike to all web page and link them together in a particular file. So here I have an example of inline CSS. And inline CSS is used to apply a unique style to a single HTML element. When you're looking at inline, we are looking at setting a CSS style by attributes in an HTML element. So if you are setting such style, it will only be affecting the particular element you are trying to edit, that is, you are trying to work on. So the following example here sets the color of H1 element to blue and the color of this P element to red. As you can see, we have the style set as an attribute, then we have the value, which is to set the color to red. This color is the property, whereas the red here is the value. We can see an example of this, which is displayed here. The H1, the text color here is blue, whereas the text color here is red. So this is an inline styling, which is only set to the particular element we are working on. Actually, here the style of H1 does not affect the style of P element. So we can look at internal CSS. Internal CSS, like I said earlier, we have the style element, but this style element will be found under our head element, which means the style element is a sub element, that it is nested inside the head element. Now we have our style element. Now we have different selector for different elements. An internal CSS is defined in the head section of the HTML page with a style element. So this will set the text color of all the H1 elements, because I am referencing all H1 here using this as a selector. Then set the color to blue, and all the P element, that is the paragraph, has set the color to red. In addition, the whole page background will be displayed as powder blue. Here we can look at an example and I will explain what we actually try to achieve here. As you can see, the body element here has no style attribute, whereas the H1 here does not have any style attribute, together with this P element does not have any style attribute. But I am able to set different style for them by selecting them under my style element in the head tag here. So here I have the body as the selector. So to set a style internally, we have the selector, that is the element name. We have um, the curly bracket, then the property name, which is very similar to what we have actually been working with when we are looking at inline styling. Then we have the value that is set to powdered blue in this point. Then here I select all h1, so which means if I should copy what I have here, then I come to the next line and I paste it down there. Let's say this is a second heading, and I do the same to paragraph. I copy the text that I have here and say this is a second paragraph. So running this code, as you can see, it's this style also take effect on this second one that I have edited here, and it's also take effect on this second paragraph that I have here, where because I'm only selecting every h1 that I have together with every p element that I have from my selector here. If I'm to select a particular element, then I will have to add some constraints to the selector, which we'll get familiar with when we are working with selectors in CSS. So let's go back to our material. We have external CSS also. Like I said earlier, this is when the CSS style are written in another document and is being referenced to this HTML file using the link element, and given the location of the CSS file, which in this point here is styles.css. So all my styles are written in the styles.css file and is referenced to this HTML using this link element. Remember, the link element does not have a closing tag, just an opening tag with two attributes, where we have the rel that says it is style sheet, then we have the href, which is pointing to the location of the file, and here the file name is just styles.css. So if you want to look at this, as you can see, I have my home here, then I have my HTML, which is everything that I have, my markup. The only thing that is different here or new here is this line here, that I have my link element, which is set to these properties, and I have my h1 which and p elements, which are still very the same. But as you can see, the output here, this stuff looks very different because of the adjustment that I've done to that. Let's look at the CSS file that I have working with that. So to look at the CSS file, if I should go into the styles of CSS, we will realize that it is very much alike with what I have here, because they have the same styling in my style.css. So it's just like copying this out and pasting it in another separate file and linking it to this particular document using the link element. And this is the style.css. So this is what it look like I said earlier, the bodies, that is the selector, then the property name, then the value. The property name that I have here is also the same like we have seen earlier, which is the background color. Then the value is set to the value that I want to set the color to be. So that is about referencing the external CSS file. But make sure that this CSS file are cited in the same location for you to be able to reference it using this style name, which is just ending with the style name, which is style.css, like we have here. So moving on to the next one, we have CSS color, font size. So we have looked at this several when we are looking at CSS, that is the style attributes in HTML. When we have the color, we have looked at the font family, and we have looked at the font size. So these are several stuff that we can use in adjusting our program. So let's take an example here. If I have this, then as you can see, in the case of this tutorial, our CSS will be written in the style tag here, which means we are not going to be working with an external style sheet due to the course of this tutorial. So what we have here in our body element is just the h1 and the p tag. The h1 just read this is an heading, and the p read this is a paragraph. So the style that is being given to this is that I set the h1, which is the selector, then this curly bracket to set whatever I'll be having for my h1. So the first style that I have for my h1 is to set the color to blue, then the font family to Verdana, and the font size to 300%, which is times 3 of what the h1 size will be. So the p, which is selecting the paragraph, that is all the paragraph text that I have, is set the color to red, then the font family to Korea, and the font size to 160%, which is about 1.6 times what I have initially. So that is why this is formatted the way it is. But if I should adjust this by changing it to 30%, you realize that the size of this heading will be changed. So let's look at what this affects to. So as you can see, this is a heading has become very small here because the font size have actually been reduced from 300 to 30%, because I'm actually trying to visualize the effect of having several style options in a particular element. So let's go back to our material and see what we have next. We also have the CSS border, like we have seen in previous tutorial, where we have the border color that is being set. So here we are looking at CSS border. We are trying to set a line or a box, just trying to display the size of this element, whether it is a block or an inline element. Here we have the border to be 2 pixel thick, that is 2 pixel thick. Then the style of this border is solid. Here I can also have it to be dashed. Then if I should run the code, you see that the style is actually different at this point. So which means this is the border thickness, this is the style, and this is the color that I'm trying to set it to. So here I can set the thickness to 5 pixels or so and run the code. Then you see that the border here is actually thicker than what I have earlier, and I can return this to what I have before, which is the solid. So I run the code and we see the effect again and see that this is actually thicker than what I have earlier. So taking this back to the default setting, you see how smaller it becomes. So using the style element, I can set various style to a particular item. Here also, the next one we will be looking at is the padding, which I use in giving an internal space to my element. And as you can see, this padding will be set using several measurements. I can use 20 pixel. This 20 pixel here will give the space between this content and the border here. Let's run this code and you see there are now spaces between the content and the border, which is everything that have to do with this content. That is what padding actually does. But if I should change this to margin, then we see the difference that it is no longer going to be between the content and the line that I have here, but it's going to be between these two lines, because these are two different elements, which means the space between these two elements will actually be different. Running this code, and as you can see, the space are different. And to increase this, I can change this to 50 so that we will see that more clearly. And as you can see, the space between two content is now about 50 pixels different. So going back to our material, we have the CSS padding. Like I said, it says the property defined padding, that is the space between the text and the border, and we have seen an example of that. And the margin also, which is the property that defines a space outside the border, that is between two different elements. So link to external CSS, we can use CSS file that is on another website, that is with a path relative to the current web page or an absolute path. So here I have the link element, then the rel attribute set to style sheet, then I have my href attribute that is set to a URL that is outside my work frame. But here, if I'm actually working with a file locally on my system, then the example, the way I will be able to link this CSS will be my file location. That's where is the file located. Here I have href set to be the folder name, then the style.css. So here also we have if the example link to the style sheet located in the same folder as the current page, which means if I'm working with the same folder, that is where my .html is where my .css also found. So if that is the case, then I'll just have to reference the name of the style sheet directly, which is styles.css. We will see more about that when we have gotten to the chapter that we have to do with HTML file path. So to summarize this lesson, we have actually looked at several ways of referencing or styling our element, which we can style it using an inline styling, that is the particular element, and we can use the internal style, that is within the same HTML page, but the style element is found in the head element, which we can give and select and give style to different elements. And we can also use the link element here to reference an external CSS file, which are located in the head element. So we have also looked at some of the properties that we can use in styling an element, such as the color, font family, size, border, padding, and margin. So that will do for this lesson. Let's take a quick exercise on what to do. Now it says use the CSS to set the background color of the document body to yellow. That is the document. Set the background color of the document actually, which we are given an int here saying the body to yellow, which means to the whole document, for me to set the background color, the element that I'll be selecting will be the body, because all my code are found in the body element. So everything that has to do with the body element, which is from the beginning to the end, then I'll have to select the body, which is the element I'm trying to select. And remember, it is in curly bracket. Then the property that I'll be setting is what? Background color. So I'll say background, then color. That is it there. Then I will have to close this using the closing square curly bracket. Then submitting this will actually give me my mark. So that is about referencing CSS in HTML. When we get to CSS, we will get familiar to much more of these properties that we can use to define the layout of our web page. Thank you. And if this video have helped you in one way or the other, please subscribe and follow.